morning, everyone from New Zealand. My name's Gloria Masters, and this is Handing the Shame Back. I'm your host, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here with you. I've got another exciting guest in the studio to interview today, and I think you're going to love her. But before I introduce Samantha to you, I just need to advise that, as with all interviews, there is a trigger warning. And the reason is we do talk about child sexual abuse because, as we know, this channel is dedicated to those of us who have experienced that. So, if for any reason, lovely audience, you start to feel triggered or a bit unsafe, please switch off, go to the show notes below, and you'll be directed to some resources for help and support. So in the meantime, it's my pleasure to bring to you Samantha Gamble. And Samantha comes to us all the way from Washington, D.C. So it's evening over there. And just let me tell you a few little things about her. She works in crimes against children as an investigator and researcher. So she's got lots of great knowledge that we can tap into. She's also a survivor who teaches people through lived experience, which I don't know about you guys, but I kind of love that because it's much more natural and real to me. If a survivor speaks, they know what they're talking about. So thanks in advance, Samantha. And thirdly, and finally, then we might let her speak. She also teaches law enforcement on how to conduct internet investigations, and I love the sound of that. So, welcome, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely honored to be here.
It's so exciting. Hey, as we're launching in, I know the audience are already thinking, oh, what's going to come out of this one? So as we're launching in, first of all, I really appreciate your bravery and courage in stepping up onto this platform because, it is going to reach people. And the reason that I asked you to share your story about your own child sexual abuse is simply this. We'll have survivors in the audience, perhaps not today, perhaps not next week, but in a month, who potentially look back, see this and think, I can relate to what Samantha said because either something similar happened to me or something she said really helped me in my recovery. So when you're comfortable, I'd love to know a little bit about your story. Tell us a little bit about something.
It's kind of a long one. Unfortunately, I experienced abuse a few different times. It hasn't happened recently. The first time it happened was when I was 7 years old, and it was a family friend. I like to call her Apple just because she had her house had a big field of orchard apples, or orchard of apples. And she was a family friend, and she was only about, I want to say 17 or something, but I was 7. And I've been over to play with her numerous times. And one of the times, unfortunately, was the time that she molested me. It was doctor play, which as a kid I had been warned kind of about, but it was always geared towards men, especially strangers or creepy guys. I remember telling my mom about it, and she just really didn't know what to do or how to react, especially since the offender was a female as well as not really an adult. Old enough to know better, but not an adult. Young enough for people to not know what to do with, I guess, is another good way to put it. So I kind of moved on from that, if you want to call it that. The second time it happened was when I was 12 years old, and it was a friend of mine, and that one was a little harder just because it was a lot of relational trauma, and it was somebody I trusted, and none of my friends believed me afterwards.
Sorry, was this a male friend or a female friend?
It was a male friend.
Wow.
And he was like 18 or 19, and I was 14. Or sorry, I was 12 the second time that happened. Now the final time and last time was another friend of mine, and he was a lot older. I had a tendency to hang out with a lot of older people, which as I was healing, I kept blaming myself for. And now that I'm older and have all the knowledge that I have, I realized that it was absolutely not my fault. So yeah, the last time it happened was a lot more invasive than the other times. And I really didn't know what to do with it, again, because it was peer-to-peer abuse. And yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, so I'm happy to answer any questions as we go.
Sure. How old were you with this third and final time, Samantha?
14 years old.
You were 14. Okay. And he was peer, meaning he was 14 as well?
No, peer as in he was a friend. So he was still older than me. He was, I want to say like 19. I can't exactly remember his age. He didn't go to school. He was graduated. It was just a kind of a small town, and so everybody knew each other. Oddly enough, my third and final abuser, when he had found out about my second abuser when I was 12, he actually went and like jumped the guy. And I viewed that almost as an act of protection, and it made me feel a lot more safe around this third person. So it was weird, and I almost didn't know if it was abuse or not, even though I had woken up with a hand around my mouth telling me to be quiet, and then I was raped. But again, I didn't know if it was abuse or not, because I didn't violently struggle. I don't know. It's hard, you know. I think a lot of victims out there probably blame themselves for the abuse or blame themselves for not stopping the abuse. But there's so much that's happening in your head that you don't even realize it. And then he had gone and very, very flippantly bragged about stealing my virginity, and people almost applauded him for it. And even though he was very much a senior person in our community, well, senior as in older than I am, it was still like I was viewed as slutty or promiscuous, things of that nature.
Wow. And just wow. So how confusing for you, Samantha, because you know these three were all friends of the family, and I guess for you as a youngster at 7, that just would have been quite confusing. And I love the fact that you could tell someone like your mum straight away. So that's so powerful that you could, and that she believed you actually, even though she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. But I guess for you, just left feeling so confused, and even after this third one, the theme of confusion running through it all, because these were so-called friends. How did you kind of manage that? He was out there bragging, you were feeling almost as if it could have been partly your fault. How did you manage all of that?
Great question. Definitely didn't get over it. I think there's a lot of ways survivors get through things.
Yeah.
And one of our body's natural responses, especially, our brain rather than our body even, is to use dissociative techniques. So some way for your brain to block out all of the painful or stressful experiences. And that's especially true for children. That's one of the major barriers in disclosure. So when I first told my mom, she believed me, but she was also like, almost, it's not really that serious, or coming up with excuses of, well, she was abused as well. And that's not even necessarily her fault. It's what she was raised to believe. And what I was raised to believe is so much abuse is all stranger danger oriented, when really, I think it's something like 93% of victims actually know their abusers personally.
Is that for child
So I
sex
use,
abuse?
yeah,
Yeah.
I used a lot of dissociative techniques as a child without realizing it. This was especially true through teenage years rather than being like, hey, I was abused. It was, I guess I'm promiscuous. And then I shelved that into almost just allowing people to kind of treat me like crap. Um, the one thing I did do to help me get through it is start using internet research techniques to keep tabs on my abuser. So I learned at a very young age, all right, no one else is going to protect me, so I need to protect myself. So I started learning how to actually pick up on predatory behavior, nonverbal communication techniques, deception techniques, and even ways like, I don't want to say stalking, but I would make sure, because my abuser still, both of them, would hang out at our local high school and with our friend circle. So I would just check social media accounts and see, where is this person? Can I avoid it? Are they going to be at this place that I'm going to be at? And it almost dictated my life for a little while, uh, until I learned not to be as scared. And a lot of that was because of the research that I was doing and because I started to find a little bit better support systems and just really believe in myself more.
So, what support was in place for you? Because I'm hearing so much action and targeted thinking was going to kind of keep you safe and protect you. Who was there for you? What support, if any, was available at that time to you?
My parents were in a little bit of disarray at the time. So my dad lived in a different state and my mom was in an incredibly abusive relationship. So for my second and third abuse, I just flat out didn't tell her. Like, she doesn't have the emotional capacity to deal with this. And I almost felt like, what was the point? Like, I wasn't ready to go through the legal process anyway. So I felt like I would be adding more stress onto her. Um, I ended up making friends with a random girl. I believe it was a friend of a friend who texted me out of the blue that said, I just heard about what happened and I want you to know that I went through a really similar thing. So it was almost like at that age, I think it was in between my two abuse. So it was at 13 years old, she had reached out to me and she ended up being my best friend for years. And she had been through a very, very similar situation where she was sexually abused by somebody who was a friend, especially within our community. She did go through the legal process, and she was really re-traumatized by it. She was actually part of why I didn't. One of the reasons that I felt like, okay, I'm not really ready to go through this legal process because it's so intimidating. I'd even go with her to court. But just knowing that I wasn't alone in it, even if it was just one single person, um, it just
Yeah.
made me feel a little bit empowered, I guess.
Gosh, there were lots of unspoken, I guess, demands on you because it sounds like what you had to do for your mum in a way was reverse the parent-child order, which we know is parentified child. So you care for mum by not disclosing, which means you're carrying the burden of not just what happened, but keeping her safe. See how it switches.
I was
Uh,
absolutely a parentified child, yes.
yeah,
My mom taught me a lot of love and compassion and forgiveness. She wasn't emotionally equipped to handle a lot of the rest. She had lived a very long life of abuse and continued to be in that. And I think when somebody's in that survival mode, they really can't look after other people.
sure.
I like to think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if somebody's very basic psychological needs aren't being met, they're not going to be able to seek out that support system, and they're not going to be able to reach that top level stage of self-actualization and caring about themselves. So I can't blame her for a lot of it, but I was taking care of her for quite a bit of my life. still sometimes am.
Yeah, of course. And she's your mum and you love her. And so that is what that is. Um, but, just want to just applaud your courage actually, and the fact that really for you trying to recover from the second and third sexual assaults, you couldn't even tell a safe adult like your mum. So I guess carrying that load, um, gosh, I'm just feeling the weight of it for you. Wow. What were your friends or so-called friends like at the time? Were you able to share with any of them, or?
Um, some and not others. I'm trying to kind of sort it all just because it was all so clumped together. Two of the last two abuses took place in the same small town, so people knew about it. And I remember telling my friend who was actually there when it happened, she was just asleep, and she did not believe me. And she actually ended up dating the guy afterwards, which really did a number on me. I'm like, okay, you were literally there when it happened. Um, and I had taken the steps, like after it was done, I got up out of the bed and I went to the neighbor's house, who also happened to be a mutual friend. And I remember laying in her bed just crying, and I couldn't tell her what happened. So she's like, here, type what happened, because that was a lot easier. So she gave me her laptop. I told her, I was like, so and so just did this to me. And she was furious, and she got up, went over to the other house, and woke up my other friend. But by that time, that guy was gone. Like he was, we were all staying the night at the same place, and he had bailed. So in my brain, I'm like, he knows that he did something wrong. But my friend, since she didn't see it happen, and sexual abuse is a truly invisible abuse by nature, she really didn't know what to do and didn't believe me. And I think ultimately maybe she thought that I was over exaggerating or overreacting. Um, I had a lot of friends on and off throughout that time. It was definitely a very self-destructive environment. And I think a lot of my friends at the time were also going through hefty traumatic times.
Goodness me. Sam, what a load.
It was a load, but I'm here now, and that's what
Yeah,
matters. And
that's what matters. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So for you, do what's kind of emerged for you, or what's some things I suppose that have helped you move through your healing and recovery?
Researching predatory behavior
No.
was a huge one.
Okay.
So that's what I really specialize in, whether it's terminology or actually conducting investigations in crimes against children's. That's where I was able to really take back a lot of my power. So as a child, I used the nonverbal communications and predatory behavior as to teach myself. Then as a professional, I got involved with internet crimes against children's investigations. So what I mean by that is investigating the people who use technology to commit very awful crimes against children, whether that is sexual or physical abuse. So knowing that I could be the first set of eyes on a kid's abuse and be the first person or only person to take the burden of proof off them was astounding for me.
Oh.
And the more I did it, the better I felt. And then I feel like I finally reached my Maslow's hierarchy of needs self-actualization, and I was able to give a lot of that back to our volunteer investigators, who also had a lot of lived experiences.
Wow, that's so powerful. Are you able to share like some of the techniques that you now know predators use? I'm just thinking for our audience, it might be really useful for us to understand, what to look for, or are there any kind of ones that you are comfortable to talk about?
Love bombing and gaslighting. So a lot of abusers will use different coercive techniques to try to silence their victims. So the more that I was able to actually identify those coercive tactics within conversations, the more I felt like I was able to protect myself. So love bombing is when a person is just abnormally showering you with love. And typically that's followed by kicking you down right afterwards and using very, very negative and manipulative techniques. Then the gaslighting is when you start to call them out on those techniques and stand up for yourself, and they tell you that you're being crazy or that never happened or you're perceiving it wrong. And sometimes, sure, that might be the case, but you start to pick up, especially abusers have this pattern of abuse. So the more that I was able to identify that pattern of abuse in conversations, the more that I was able to go, I'm not going to interact or invest my emotional energy into this person. And I don't expect that person to explain it. I've learned the hard way that calling somebody out on that and trying to get them to understand usually almost always makes it worse. They use that as ammunition to fire back at you, and then you're emotionally hijacked, so you don't know how to process that situation, and the cycle of abuse continues.
Yes. And I guess, there'll be other aspects of mental health issues in there. I'm hearing some wounded narcissism from some of these people that are gaslighting. How do you challenge me? I'll show you.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes, yeah. So it's quite interesting. And I guess I'm interested, as I'm listening to you, and I think, audience, aren't we lucky having this conversation? My gosh, don't go away. So, Samantha, when you're looking at this predatory behavior, can you explain to us, are you tracking someone's conversation through the internet? Have you been put onto a case? Can you tell us a little bit so that we're really clear about how this comes about and what you're noticing? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. That's a great question. A little bit of both. So sometimes I would get cases, and sometimes I still do get cases from active law enforcement that goes, I have a victim, I have a username of the offender, can you please help me? So we then take that username and create something that's a parallel reconstructive file for law enforcement. So that means I teach them in a full report how to go from point A to point Z. And that means I never have to go to court, which is amazing. So here's how to actually conduct the identification process. That is less identifying predatory behavior and more identifying just physical attribution and their digital footprint. When I do predator identification, I'm looking for key terms, hashtags, violent behavior, any footprint on places where they're really not supposed to be. So a lot of the times I would see, even on sexting forums, people using very coded language to facilitate crimes against children or actual child exploitation material exchange. So I would look out for those unique identifiers and build any profile around the hashtags, websites that they use, special interests, things that they like, friends that they follow, things of that nature.
Okay. So I suppose sometimes some of what you uncover can be quite shocking. How do you protect yourself against that, from being triggered or being traumatized?
That's another great question.
Oh.
I think that's very different for everybody, and some cases are harder than others, that's for sure. I tend to focus more on very, very violent crimes just because I know I can compartmentalize really well, and I feel like that's an area not a lot of people can. So if I have the ability, then I want to invest my time in there. However, we also had, when I previously worked as the predator identification team manager at another nonprofit, we had a huge mental health aspect. So it was actually mandatory to go and talk to a work therapist, essentially.
Yeah.
Same HIPAA protections, everything.
Yeah.
And actually talk about your casework and any frustrations. Aside from that, my team was phenomenal as a support system, as investigators, and really just such talented people to surround yourself with.
Yeah.
So part of our day to day was to actually meet together as a group and conduct kind of on video calls together, where we're not only doing this work and helping share and spread that emotional bandwidth, but we're also trying to talk to each other about the frustrations that we see, the barriers that we see in the legal system. What can we do to better protect our children, protect ourselves, and facilitate the people who can actually go after these people or these offenders?
And that's really powerful, because there is that element, of course, of vicarious traumatization. And it seems like you're able to mitigate against that by having that wonderful group sharing. And there's nothing like, and for audience out there, you'll get this, it's like talking to other survivors. There's nothing like having a group who have gone through or experiencing similar things to be able to almost organ code and just
Yes.
release from yourself, shake it off, and move on. So that sounds like fascinating work, and good on you for getting in there, man, because I think sometimes as survivors we develop these skills, and we're going to spot someone at 100 paces, and sometimes it's our hypervigilance that we've learned, we carry with us as survivors. One of our hallmarks is that. So I suspect that stands you in great stead when you're out there. I wouldn't want to be someone on your watch, Samantha. Put it that way.
I like to think we're pretty talented and good at what we do. The longest sentence that we were able to facilitate achievement of was 105 years. And that's just such a powerful
Wow.
feeling, because you see crimes like these being not only underreported but under-prosecuted. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not necessarily always the legal system, it's just because of that type of abuse by nature. But being able to, not only did we put this person in prison, we were able to make sure that child never has to go to court.
That's
Ever.
fantastic.
Because they had nothing to do with the disclosure.
That's fantastic. And that you must feel so proud of that, and the team must as well, because our beautiful children and teenagers out there who have unfortunately experienced this, it's really hard for them to have a voice, let alone speak to other professional lawyers, police, etc. about it. So it's fantastic. So the whole point, I guess, of asking you was, kind of what's helped you move through your own healing, I guess, and as we know, it's never linear. it's never step 1, 2, and 3. Sorry, audience, you just have to accept that.
It's never linear. You can
Yeah.
take so many steps forward and then take double the steps back,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean you're farther from your healing point. You're still, I guess that might not be the best way to explain it. You've still done all that work and all that healing. It's not all for nothing. Your response is temporary, and we all will get through it. It's just we need to be able to empower others to actually help support them through it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I like that you've said that. I think sometimes there's an expectation of, why do you still need to talk about it? Because it's really important, and we might save a child's life or your grandchild's life. So I'm never going to stop talking about it. But because it's such a difficult topic, people don't want to talk about it, which just gives a free pass, I think, to the pedophiles out there. So we've
They
got to
count on that.
They count on it. Wow. So, Samantha, back to you.com. It's all about you.com. What else has helped you in your healing journey and recovery from this? What's kind of helped apart from doing this work? Working with crimes against.
Understanding more and more about how our brains work, and understanding the barriers in disclosure and why people respond the way that we do. So as society, we're really prone to just kind of shut this out. So I found it really healing to actually just shine a light as much as I can. Like, here are the misconceptions about child sexual abuse, which I get really excited to talk about, and other people do not. So if I can find a way to put that in a digestible format and have some brevity to it, it really does seem to click better with people
Yeah.
instead of being very, very dark and lecturing. I kind of have a dark humor of my own. I guess you can call it a coping mechanism. And it's helped me through that process, and it's helped other people as well. One thing I've recently, go ahead.
So I was going to say, I think that black humour is fantastic, and I think we need it. We're working in a space where it is dark. And if we can't switch it up and just release some tension through using black humor or dark humor, it's just too hard. Otherwise, I think our minds need a break from it and some levity as well. So good on you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So I try to have fun when I talk about these topics in a very professional way still. So one thing that I've recently began doing is started writing more. I recently actually, I think a couple weeks ago, just released my survivor story in a written format for those of you who would like to read it. And I felt amazing afterwards, and it was definitely intimidating. But as soon as I started getting some private responses of people not thanking me, but saying that they didn't know that they weren't alone, was incredible. For somebody to say, "Oh my God, I thought that I was the only person who experienced this. You helped me not feel so isolated." That's a feeling I want to keep propelling. So I hope to put more writing out there, especially on the misconception of child sexual abuse and how we can kind of mitigate those myths and biases that surround it.
I love that. And I read what you wrote, and I thought you were a professional writer who did it for a job. That's how
I
well
wrote it
written
on
it
an airplane
was.
ride.
Yeah, all right. Now you're making a sort of no. No, it was great. It was great. And I can see how it just has given hope to others. And you've got to keep doing it. It's fantastic. So, are you able to share an audience? Forgive me, but I like hearing about this stuff because I think it helps inform us. And even if you're not at the stage where you're confident to share, that's 100% fine. But we're still all able to advocate for our children and young people. So, Samantha, back to you. Can you give us some of those misconceptions, please, or statistics you were referring to? If you're able to, maybe even just 3 or 4 is fine.
uh Stranger danger is probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
So a lot of us were raised to think that a pedophile or a child sexual abuser is somebody who's in a shady van, some sketchy looking guy offering me candy or asking me to help look for his puppy. When in reality, they leverage positions of authority and trust, whether it's in our community, whether it is in school settings, anything of that nature. Babysitters, things like that.
Yep.
Like I said, I believe, I wish I had the statistic on the top of my head. I have lots of things going on in my brain. I believe it's 93% of children know their abuser.
Yep.
And that is a staggering fact, especially when we start to think about the stranger danger aspect. That's not true. So we're really doing ourselves and our children and our community a disservice when we're teaching people that.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
Another big one is female predators, and those hold a special place in my heart just because my first abuser was a female. And society's approach to it is very, very difficult to break. Think of the hot for teacher trope, or especially when a boy says that they're being abused by somebody, it's like, high five, bud, you just got with an older woman. And it's like, that's abuse. And the more that we diminish that, the harder it is going to be for them. a large number of men, especially who have been abused, didn't even consider their abuse as actual abuse because the offender was a female.
Yeah.
So that's another huge one.
It's interesting you say that, and okay, for me to discuss this point with you. Um, I had the honour actually of listening to a man, it was a few years ago now, talk about being 15 years of age and having a female teacher sexually abuse him. And he knew he could never speak of it because of exactly what you've just said. Oh, good on you, mate, or
High
gee,
five, bud.
why didn't she choose me? So he carried that, and he carried that for nearly 30 years. And when I finally was honoured enough to be the first person he ever shared it with, he he just felt such shame and such relief, which sounds bizarre, but it was both. And because there was no permission, and when you think about women in society, they're seen as the Madonna, the nurturer, the love giver and provider, uh, and almost saintly. And so even judges, even in our political system and legal system, there's no room for female abusers, and it's almost impossible, I've been told, to actually have that taken seriously. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts around that. What do you see happening in that space?
It is. I've actually even been trying to recently research the biases within our court system when it comes to prosecuting female offenders versus male offenders.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Society views female offenders like, not only do they think it's a less invasive abuse, but they think it's just overall less important.
Yes.
When it's like, this is supposed to be a maternal figure of some kind. This is supposed to be a
Yes.
caretaker figure. And that sticks with boys, girls, anybody, because they start to think that their abuse is a lot less serious. Brittany Zamora was an offender, a female offender. She was a teacher, and I believe
Yes.
the news even referenced her looks
Yes.
numerous times
Yeah.
about how pretty she was
Yeah.
and how nice she was. And she tried to even use that to try to get a lesser sentence, like, oh, what are they going to do to me in prison? And it kind of worked. And I can only imagine how the victim felt during all of that. Like, I'm telling you that I was sexually abused, and you're telling me how hot she was.
But
So we can do better.
We can do a lot better. And the other thing too is, I think you'd be interested in your thoughts on this, but we live in a patriarchal world where men are seen as the protectors, the strong ones, the providers. They'll defend, they'll look after. So there's no real room for them to be weak or vulnerable or hurt or abused or sad or grieving or feeling confused. There's none of that. So if you
Absolutely.
put that together with a female abuser, it's, well, why did you let it happen? Let's show you a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old boy. Really? What power do they have?
Right.
So yeah.
Especially if they're being taught those things at a young age, that it's just stranger danger, only men can abuse, when really we should be focusing to teach our children, like, these are your physical body's boundaries, and everyone has to respect them, whether it is me as your mom, whether it is me
Yeah.
as your dad, teacher, coach. You have to respect those physical boundaries. Now, the things that we'll teach our 5-year-old are going to be different than the things that we teach our 15-year-old, which is why it's so important to empower them with really respecting their boundaries and understanding that their boundaries will be respected at a very young age. That way they feel actually strong enough to come forward if abuse ever does happen, if sextortion ever happens, or even if they're scared that something is about to happen.
Absolutely. And look, there's a whole path we could go down. And I'm just aware we may not have time, but I'm fascinated. So, what other myths are out there, Samantha, that have struck you?
We seem to think that kids will just have an easy time disclosing, like
Uh,
they should just know how to do it. Most adults don't even know how to disclose. Think about a time that you had like you think that somebody was mad at you. Did you really want to go and talk to that person and tell them how mad they made you? Think about a kid if they broke a lamp. They think they're in trouble.
yeah,
They think an adult is the authority figure, and anything they do that may be against that adult is wrong and that they will be in trouble for. So we really can't expect children to disclose. They don't have that physical or mental capacity most of the times. And again, a lot of the times they don't even know what's happening is actually abuse. They think an adult is telling me to do this. That must be what I'm supposed to do. And usually that predator will reframe things in a different way to not call it abuse, not call it the actual names for your private parts. They'll come up with some other name for it, or they'll disguise it as like a game or something.
yeah,
So children really internalize that. So the more that we teach ourselves on how to read between the lines, whether it's reading between the lines of disclosure or how to identify potential victims of sexual abuse, the more that we can actually help our children process that and begin to heal.
yeah. But and you raise some really interesting points, Samantha. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, to be honest, I think most of us as survivors, this is our biggest challenge, will have been disclosing as adults. As adults.
Yes, most disclosure is delayed, if it even happens. And that's
Exactly.
still hard.
It's like, I liken it to jumping off a tall cliff. No one would willingly do that. And the reason we find it so hard as adults is because we were conditioned, shut down, in some cases threatened or manipulated, coerced, however you want to call it. I'm big, you're little, I'm smart, you're dumb, all of that. I'm right, you're wrong. So there was no way as children we could speak. Fast track that to today. How many survivors genuinely feel confident? And I'm asking you, audience, as well, who really feels 100% confidence about speaking out? So if it's that hard for us as adult survivors, can you imagine the terrain these beautiful children and teenagers have to traverse to
Think of
even, yeah,
think of a diving board is what I was thinking of when you said the cliff analogy.
yeah.
You're so scared, like you're excited to climb up there, and then as soon as you get to the edge of that diving board, you're like,
What
oh,
was I thinking?
hold on. And you'll probably be safe logically, like you're not gonna die, but oh my god, it's scary. And you're thinking of all the ways that it'll hurt, if people will make fun of you for it, if you're gonna do it correctly, like what's the point? And there's just so much ambiguity in it that you don't know, like you start to hesitate and you don't know if you even should or not. That's just on a recreational activity. Think about think about when it comes to your body and the way that you are going to perceive yourself and the way that you think you're going to have others perceive you the rest of your life, especially if you're worried that they're going to treat you like you're a piece of glass.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, I don't know how to describe that part as well.
yeah. No, you'll get there though. You'll find your
The
words.
fragility of it, like people
Yes.
start to think that you're too fragile, and you can almost visibly see them start to treat you differently.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of maybes and what ifs and should haves when somebody is starting to even think about disclosure. And that's if they get to that diving board stage.
That's it. It's so hard. So I guess my whole point was to bring it back to what you're saying, which is about how challenging it is for our beautiful little tamariki and teenagers to ever have the confidence to even think about disclosing. So I think that's a really, really good myth that you have exposed. So, um, Samantha, I guess the other thing is you're doing some fantastic work out there. Is there anything you'd like to share about what you're doing as well? I realise what you're advocating for, and you're helping people through your own lived experience, which I love. Much rather hear from you than from a professional who's done some research. It's, to me, the survivor has the gold every time. Take that, audience. You've got the gold. Could you give me some, please? No,
Yeah.
seriously.
I always like to tell people I'm not a cop, I am not a lawyer, I don't have a degree in psychology. I am just a survivor who loves research and is very, very, very curious.
Fantastic. So,
If you're
yeah.
somebody, sorry, I have a
No,
little
no,
bit of delay. I'm on Wi-Fi rather than wired normally.
no problem. So I guess I'm interested, when I introduced you earlier, and we looked at what you're doing, and I guess one of the things is, you're teaching law enforcement how to conduct those internet interviews. I guess I'm interested, investigations, how you go about that. What would you like to share with us about that?
Yeah, so I do a few different things. I
Yeah.
volunteer with several places. So if you want to get involved or if you want a good cause to support, there's ncptf.org, which stands for the National Child Protection Task Force. That is an incredible group of people who actually go out and help make the arrest on these people, as well as facilitate education for law enforcement and the investigative side. Another group is, I believe it's followmoneyfightslavery.org. They're also known as Team ATII, which stands for the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative. And they are another group who does very similar work that's just more geared towards human trafficking as a whole rather than exclusively to children. So with them, I act as a human threat identification team manager, all on a volunteer level, where I'll help not only facilitate the investigations, but help teach any law enforcement that asks for help how to conduct these investigations, different predatory terminology or techniques, things of that nature. Then locally, I sit on the board of directors for the Idaho Internet Crimes Against Children's Coalition, which our main goal is to facilitate our local task force with funding, software needs, and educate the public on how to better protect their children online. So
Wow.
those are three very amazing causes to get involved in.
Wow.
Now, if you're not specific to the child side of things, but you are a survivor, another amazing group is Operation Safe Escape, and they assist victims of domestic violence. And they actually assist with victim service. They are a victim service provider, essentially, and will really help navigate people towards the correct resources, whether it is local or anything of that nature.
Fantastic. Well, I don't know how you actually do any other work if you're doing all this volunteering. You're phenomenal. So do you, I guess, we've probably got a few minutes left. Are you able to share with us how you've talked a little bit about your recovery, kind of what's worked for you? What, I know you don't like giving advice, which I really respect, but I guess what's worked for you so that other survivors may pick up an odd thing here or there that may help them as well. Take note, survivors out there. You could learn some good stuff now. No pressure,
So
Sam.
I think we touched on one of them, is that healing's not linear.
Yep.
Another one is our abuse isn't uniform, but it's also not unique. Now, the primary highlight of that message is you're not alone, and people do care. There's a lot of people that care,
Yeah.
and it's okay. Like, I hate hearing people say it's okay to not be okay, but it really is, and you have to find the right group that's actually going to support you through that. And if you're not with that group, they might just not be the right people for you. And it's okay to find that. So I really encourage people to look for survivor advocate groups or ways that they can connect with other people so they don't feel so embarrassed or isolated and feel like that they have a sense of community. I think that's really what helped me is as soon as I dove into not only the survivor community, but the technology and InfoSec community, the more I felt like I was just empowered. And the more I felt, okay, these people do like me, they do believe me, and they'll actually help, and they might be able to help other people as well. So I think a lot of it is finding what makes you feel empowered and finding even your method of disclosure, because disclosure can come out in several different ways. I'm not great at verbal things. I love writing, absolutely love it. And that's my form of disclosure. Some people prefer drawing, singing. Some people are very vocal, and that's also amazing. But I think to recognize that someone else's disclosure isn't necessarily yours. So be comfortable knowing that there are other people in similar situations, and it's okay if your stories aren't the exact same, because the root of it comes down to disempowerment.
And that's incredibly powerful. I was trying to think of another word because you just used the word disempowerment, but I can't.
It's okay.
Incredibly
It's okay.
powerful. So what about in terms of things like physically, like yoga or hiking or anything like what's worked for you? What do you love? How do you use your body to relate? I mean, anything along those lines?
Yes. So when I was a teenager, I was very disassociative, lots of like maladaptive daydreaming and anything I could do to depersonalize and derealize from my reality. Then I started getting more involved in physical activity, and part of the reason that I started doing that is because I learned how our brain produces dopamine, and how working out can actually help facilitate that dopamine. And I don't mean like go be a power lifter or anything like that, but taking that little walk for your mental health makes a pretty large difference. And not only that, but if our brains are disassociating, our bodies aren't. So there's a great book called The Body Keeps Score.
Yes.
By Bessel van der Kolk,
yes.
I believe.
Yes.
If you haven't read that book, any audience out there, I highly encourage it. It was able to help me really understand, like, not only understand, but begin to identify and mitigate poor behaviors or the way that my body is internalizing that stress and the way that my body will physically display the trauma that I've been going through. So it's not easy, and I still struggle with it, but doing that even 10 to 15 minutes of a mental check for yourself and stretching, deep breathing exercises, and working out a little bit, it doesn't have to be strenuous, and it makes such a huge difference to help make space in your body and your mind.
I love it, and my mind immediately latched onto even just a little bit. I thought, yes.
So even just a little bit. Even just a little bit. I hated being told like you have to go work out. I'm like, I have like fibromyalgia and crap like that. There's no way I'm gonna go spend hours at a gym. But doing the little stretches, like even if it's a little weight or focused breathing to help stretch your lungs and get your brain the oxygen that it needs.
It's fantastic.
It's that small piece of giving yourself the time that you deserve.
I agree. And look, I think, just as we're closing out, is there anything you would like to share that you maybe haven't had an opportunity yet today?
There are so many things going through my mind resource-wise. I
Just
would be happy
to
provide my email as well for those who have any questions about resources. But
okay.
I think the root of it comes down to you're not alone in any of this. And I can't say that enough because sometimes I still feel like that, even with a support system, which I think is important to highlight. Just because somebody has a support system and just because somebody, whether it's yourself or myself, is being vocal, we'll still have bad days. And
Yeah.
that's absolutely okay, and it's normal.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love it that you said that. Thank you for your courage, Sam. And I think, just as we're finishing, so appreciate you. Couple of well, many things. It's a very exciting conversation for me today, guys out there. Isn't she great? We'll have to get her back. So one of two things actually that really leapt out at me were uh, do what makes you feel empowered, because what works for me may not grab you. What Samantha talked about may have high appeal, or there may be something completely different. So that's the tip. If you find that there's something that works for you, grab that and don't let go. And the other thing is, there's so many ways to disclose, and I love that Samantha reminded us all of that as well. So, beautiful survivors out there, we've come to another close with a fantastic survivor. And look, I just encourage each of you, look deep into your heart. Please know how far you have come, because you have. And I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you. Until next time, fabulous ones.